afternoon. So today we are going to talk about moral standards. If all rules are not moral rules, then we can also state that not all standards are moral standards. For us to fully understand what this said quote means, we first need to define rules and standards. What are rules? Rules are prescribed guide for conduct or action, laws or regulations prescribed by the founder for observance by its members. Examples of rules. Kadalasan kapag first day of school, the professors set rules to regulate the behavior of the students inside a class. It serves as a guide on how should we act or behave, what are things that we should do and not do. Another example is the rules in sports. So now let's move on to standards. Standards are ideas or things that are used as a measure, norm, or model in a comparative evaluations. Something set up and established by authority as a rule for the measure of quantity, weight, extent, value, or quality. Kung sa rules, sabi dun, it serves as a guide. Standards naman, the purpose of standards is to measure, to evaluate. Let's say sa beauty standards. We can all agree that beauty standards vary depending sa tao, sa perception ng tao, and many other more factors. For a certain thing or a certain person to be called beautiful, it should possess the qualities na nakasaad doon sa mismong standards. In other words, criteria. After we're done talking about rules and standards relate to each other in a way that they both serve as guidelines and they are both established by the conductor or the authority. To simplify, not all rules and standards are moral. If then, how can we say that a certain rule or certain standard is moral or non-moral? What is the fine line between moral and non-moral standards? For us to answer these questions, we first need to identify the definition of moral standards. Morality may refer to the standards that a person or group has about what is right and wrong, or good and evil. Moral standards have involved the rules people have about the kinds of actions they believe are right and wrong, as well as the values they place on the kinds of objects they believe are morally good and immorally bad. So this is pretty much self-explanatory. Basically, the normative junction of moral are good versus evil, right versus wrong, moral versus immoral. Moral standards, if you remember what we talk about standards, it is used to evaluate. So to what extent can we say that an action or behavior is moral? According to some scholars, norms plus values equals moral standards. What are norms and values? Norms are general rules about actions or behaviors. Example, killing innocent people is absolutely wrong. So why is this belief considered as a general rule or a norm? The reason is because that we humans are naturally born with conscience. That is why we are able to know for a fact that killing is absolutely wrong. But of course, there are some exceptions to this. One are those who are amoral, or those who were not born with conscience. That is why they are unable to identify right from wrong. But of course, we're not going to talk about that, so let's move on to values. Values are enduring beliefs about what is good and desirable. Beliefs and ideals. Example, helping people who are in need is right. This is pretty much self-explanatory because we all had subjects that we took in elementary and high school. Values, education sa pagpapakatao, good manners and right conduct. Those are basically it. So values, these are characteristics or traits or beliefs that are considered good and desirable.
Non-moral standards refer to rules that are unrelated to moral or ethical considerations. Either these standards are not necessarily linked to morality or by nature lack ethical sense. Basic examples of non-moral standards include rules of etiquette, fashion standards, rules in games, and various house rules. Technically, religious rules, some traditions, and legal statutes. For example, laws and ordinances. are non-moral principles, though they can be ethically relevant depending on some factors and context. So, for further explanation about non-moral standards, which is also called conventional standards, that means these are standards based on what is generally done or believed. In addition, an individual or a group judges which is good or bad, right or wrong, in a non-moral way. So like what is mentioned, etiquettes, manners, and house rules are best examples for non-moral standards.
Number 1. Moral standards involve serious wrongs or significant benefits. Moral standards deal with matter which can seriously impact, that is, injure or benefit human beings. Sa isang halimbawa nito, yung pagsunod or pag-violate ng basketball rules. Yung pag-violate nun, paglabag nun, maaaring magmamatter yon sa mga basketball games lamang at hindi naman yun nag-a-apply sa mga volleyball games. Pero, it does not necessarily affect one's life or well-being. So, ganun siya. In simple words, so, it may be wise na magsinungaling para mag-save ng dignity ng isang tao, pero it is probably non-moral or morally wrong to do so, na magsinungaling. Number 2, moral standards ought to be preferred to other values. Ibig sabihin na yung moral standard ay may mga i-overlap siya na values. If a moral standard states that a person has a moral obligation to do something, then he or she is supposed to do that even if it conflicts with non-moral standards or even if with self-interest. Sinasabi lang dyan na kung meron kang moral obligation to do something o kaya ay trabaho to do something, kailangan mo pa rin yun sundin kahit na nagko-conflict siya sa non-moral standards or sa self-interest mo. Isang sample dito is yung antebellum law. So, antebellum means pre-war or before war. Nagkaroon ng antebellum law na yung mga citizens, kailangan nilang i-return or isaoli yung mga slaves sa owners nila. So, alam naman natin na non-moral yung slavery, it is bad, pero nagkaroon nga ng ganong law. So, basically, kailangan pa rin nila i-return yung mga slaves sa owners. Kasi, kahit pa sinabi mo na nagsasalba ka ng buhay, pero during that time, and under antebellum law, that is illegal. Bakit ganon? Kasi generally, we all agree na moral duty natin na mag-obey ng law, pagsunod sa batas. So, kung hindi na makokontrol yon, na hindi natin mostly nasusunod yung batas, that is there comes a time na may matatawag tayong non-moral na gawain para mapasunod yung mga tao. Pwede din natin i-connect siya sa death penalty. Sa ibang bansa merong death penalty, di ba? Imagine ikaw ay doktor ka. Pero ang gagawin mo is magi-inject ng lethal injection para sa mga convicted under the death penalty. So, that applies sa mga heinous crimes, right? So, kahit na labag sa loob mong pumatay or alam mong non-moral yung pagpatay, pero that is your job to do so. So, kailangan mo pa rin gawin na mailagay yung lethal injection sa isang convicted murderer, ganon, murderer, rapist, yon. So, dun siya nag-a-apply.
Third characteristic of moral standard. Moral standards are not established by authority figures. This means that it is not invented or formed by authoritative body or legislative bodies. Instead, this value ought to be considered in the process of making law. Moral standard cannot be changed nor nullified by the decision of particular authoritative body. Number 4. Moral standards have traits of universalizability, or it applies to all, whether you're from another country. Telling the truth, honesty. Kahit hindi ka man nakapag-aral or hindi mo to napag-aralan is alam mo ito. Telling the truth is a universal standard. Hindi tayo dapat magsinungaling. Doon pa lang masasabi na natin na it is applicable to all. Kahit bata ka, matanda ka, mahirap o mayaman, taga-ibang bansa ka man or taga dito ka. Isa pang halimbawa, yung golden rule na do unto others what you would them do unto you. It cannot be right for A to treat B in a manner in which it would be wrong for B to treat A. Hindi maaring maging tama kay A na itrato si B sa paraang o manners na magiging mali kay B na itrato ng ganon si A. Yes, magkaiba man silang tao pero parehas lang sila ng natures.
Moral standards are based on impartial considerations, meaning dapat hindi ka bias sa paggawa mo ng desisyon. You need to be equal. For example, merong isang couple, si boy and si girl. Then, tropa mo si boy. Nagloko siya kay girl. Tapos, hindi porket magtropa kayo ni boy, ito-tolerate mo na agad yung pagloloko na ginawa niya. Dapat hindi ka bias sa kanilang dalawa, na porket magkaibigan kayo ni boy, itatago mo na yung panlolokong nagawa niya. Moral standards are associated with special emotion and vocabulary. It means kapag ang isang tao nagsabi ng kasinungalingan after ng action niya na iyon, makaka-feel siya ng guilt and mawawala yung self-esteem nito. For example, ako, nagsinungaling ako sa parents ko. Then, after ko magawa yun, after ko magsinungaling sa kanila, syempre, magigilty ako dahil hindi naman totoo yung sinabi ko sa kanila.
Today, we're going to talk about moral dilemma. Pero bago pa man ang lahat, let's define first what is dilemma. Dilemma, according to Merriam-Webster Dictionary, is a situation in which one has to choose between two or more equally unsatisfactory choices. Take note that these choices will have negative or undesirable implication to the person or to his or her interest. Let's say one has to choose between sleeping and studying for the upcoming exam. Because the student wasn't able to sleep enough for the past few days, he deadly wants to sleep, but he has an upcoming exam for the next 2 hours. Sleeping will satisfy his biological needs but compromises his grades. The other side of the coin, reviewing for the exam will result to more physical and mental exhaustion, but the likeliness he will get high score is also higher. Now that's a dilemma. Now, what is moral dilemma? It's a dilemma in which the choices a person has will transgress moral principles. Transgress, meaning to violate. Kaya gaya ng dilemma, anuman ang piliin ng tao sa sitwasyon na iyon ay may negatibong implikasyon sa kanya. Sa moral dilemma, ang implikasyon din nito ay ang paglabag ng tao sa kanyang moral na prinsipyo. Sabihin natin may dalawang pagpipili ang kilos ang tao sa moral dilemma. Maaari niyang gawin kahit anuman sa dalawang iyon. Ngunit, isa lang sa dalawang iyon. Halimbawa, mangungopya ba siya o hindi? Maaaring oo, maaaring hindi. Kung oo, kino-compromise niya ang moral principle na integridad kapalit ng mas mataas na grades. Kung hindi naman siya mangungopya pero hindi rin siya nakapag-review ng sapat dahil natulog siya, hindi siya makakaramdam ng pagkakonsensya dahil hindi naman niya pinagpalit ang integridad niya sa grado. Ngunit makakakuha naman siya ng mas mababang grado. Isipin pa nating mabuti. Sa moral dilemma, ang taong magdesisyon ay may kaalaman sa moral principles. Dahil kung wala, bakit pa siya mag-i-struggle na pumili kung hindi naman pala mahalaga sa kanya ang isang prinsipyo? Kaya may mga taong mahiling mangopya ng mga sagot dahil hindi nila kinikilala o hindi matibay sa kanila ang principle of integrity. Dahil doon, hindi sila mahihirapan sa pagpiling mangopya na lamang in comparison sa mga taong may principle of integrity. Ngayon, may 3 uri ang dilema at tatalakayin pa yan ng susunod nating taga-ulat.
One of the 3 levels of moral dilemmas. Personal dilemmas. Personal dilemmas are those experienced and resolved on the personal level. When your decision in a situation where there is moral conflict and a cause of either your own and another person or a group of people is potentially harmed. So, kung ang naapektuhan sa desisyon na gagawin mo is ang iyong friend or family or kung sino mang may personal relationship sa'yo, maaring mapasok yun sa personal dilemmas. One example of personal dilemmas. So, merong magkapatid na twin, si Jack at Jill. Si Jill ay may sakit. Meron siyang kidney failure. Both kidney niya is nag-failed. While si Jack naman ay merong healthy na kidney. Both kidneys niya ay healthy. So, wala silang nahanap na donor ng kidney at sakto namang nag-match si Jack na maaaring mag-donate ng kidney kay Jill. So, si Jack ngayon ay naiipit sa isang personal dilemmas wherein na yung decision niya is either ibigay yung isa niyang kidney kay Jill or hindi niya ibibigay yung kidney niya kay Jill. Wherein, kapag binigay niya yung isa niyang kidney kay Jill, maaaring in a long term, siya naman yung magkasakit sa kidney. At kung hindi naman niya ibibigay yung kidney niya kay Jill, maaaring maapektuhan nito ng tuluyan si Jill dahil sa dialysis niya weekly. At maaari din silang mahirapan sa kung saan sila kukuha ng perang gagamitin para doon. Isa pang example ng personal dilemmas. Merong isang dalagang Pilipina at meron siyang jowa na Muslim. Gusto nilang magpakasal, pero nasa tradisyon na kung magpapakasal siya doon sa Muslim na lalaki, kailangan niyang magpa-convert into Muslim din. So, pero ayaw ng father niya na magpa-convert siya. So, ngayon, naiipit yung babae sa isang sitwasyon kung pipiliin niya yung jowa niya o yung father niya. Wherein, kung pipiliin niya yung jowa niya is magpapa-convert siya dahil mahal na mahal niya yung jowa niya or susundin niya yung father niya dahil pamilya niya ito at tatay niya siya.
Organizational moral dilemmas refer to ethical cases encountered and resolved by social organizations. This category includes moral dilemmas in business, medical field, and public sector. To further enlighten you about what organizational dilemma is, so organizational dilemma is an ethical standard that is applicable within an organization. The best given example about that is those who are in the Department of Health, which are the doctors, nurses. Of course, they are following a certain code of ethics. So this certain organization or people are experiencing organizational dilemmas. Organizational dilemmas which make them choose between two things or an action that they need to be done. So that concludes our discussion about organizational dilemma.
Structural dilemma. It refers to cases involving institutions. It is more on dilemmas about company na walang madaling solutions. For example, how to hold the company. It's either too loose or too tight. You need to choose if magiging maluwag ka ba na boss, yung papabayaan mo lang workers mo sa mga gusto nilang gawin sa trabaho nila, or too tight na magiging mahigpit ka and ikaw ang magkokontrol ng mga dapat nilang gawin. Another example, underuse versus overload. If the employees have a little work, they will become bored, while pag binigyan mo naman ng maraming trabaho, they will get tired doing it. This moral dilemmas has no easy answers. You will have a struggle in choosing and making a decision.